Hello and welcome everyone to this virtual visit to the greatest art museums in the world. Do you know that more people visit art museums a year than all sporting events, movies, and church services put together? You know, why is that? Rich and poor people, statistics show that people live longer if they're involved in art in some way. And to quote Picasso, art washes away the dust of everyday life from the soul. So nowhere on earth will you find a greater collection in such close proximity than in New York City. And so tonight we're going to visit four that are near and dear to my heart. But first, you know, after flying there, we're going to sleep in the plaza. So we're going to get up early in the morning, and here's your royal suite at the plaza, which is just a stone's throw away from all these fabulous museums. So time to wake up and get on the road. So first we're going to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and then the Frick Collection, the Modern Museum of Art, known as the MoMA, and then finally we'll end up at the Whitney. So get ready. We're going to walk along Park Avenue. We're going to walk up to the Metropolitan at first. And as we go up Central Park, you're going to notice all 840 acres of this beautiful park in the middle of the city. We're going to pass many opulent, apartment buildings. We're going to go by the Frick first, but we're going to see that in just a few minutes. We're going to go by art vendors. We're going to go by food trucks. We're going to go by everything. And here's a wonderful shot of the Met. I think the New York fathers and mothers decided we needed a big park like this, just like the Tuileries in Paris and the great parks in London. And so we have one of our own, Kensington and Hyde Park in London. So there's the Metropolitan. Now, at first, when Olmsted was designing landscape architecture, was designing Central Park, he said, absolutely no public buildings are going to be in my park. But he was afraid it was going to interfere with the forest. And so the fathers finally talked him into letting him put the Metropolitan. Over 2 million square feet of art and architecture. And so you can see the facade designed by Richard Morris Hunt, carried out by his sons after he passed away. You can tell that Hunt was trained in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts because his building is a perfect example of Beaux-Arts. You can see the Greek and Roman architecture influence. And once it was built, in this neoclassical palace to artists, and one of the finest in the world, the only public building in recent years which approaches in dignity and grandeur the museums of the old world. And in fact, it still is the second largest art museum in the world, only second to the Louvre. So as you walk in, it's like a cathedral-like entrance. I was looking all over the internet to find out just how tall those ceilings are. But once you go in that museum, you know that you've arrived. It's almost like arriving at the Vatican. You can see the Corinthian columns there. You can see the beautiful arches, the marble floors. It's just incredible. There's over 2 million pieces of art as well in 17 distinctive departments. Here's another aerial shot. You can see the consolidation of all those buildings in New York City. And right across from it, you have a haven to the arts, which is the Metropolitan. So in 1866, some very wealthy Americans, all the New Yorkers, of course, go to Paris in the summer. You don't want to hang out in New York in the summer. So all these rich American New Yorkers would go to Paris and they look around and they think, hey, we need a Louvre. We need to come back and do an edifice to art. We want to educate the Americans about art. And so they started a small collection. Somebody, donated a Roman sarcophagus. That was a good start. But in a few years, they had amassed just about 200 European paintings. And they were ensconced in the first Metropolitan, which you'll see in just a minute. The scope is incredible. They have work from over 5,000 years ago until contemporary art today. So here's a ground floor map. You can see briefly all the little paths we're going to take through there. And then, of course, they have a second floor full of beautiful things, amazing things, wonderful things. And here they even replicated facades from buildings in the sculpture court. And you can see that when it was added onto in the 60s, they did a lot of skylights. So a lot of natural lights come into the museum. Here's the original building, and they kept some of the facade and they ensconced it into the Met as it sits today. And they again put skylights so that you could see these beautiful Roman and Greek sculptures as you pass through there, just bathed in beautiful light. So talk about going back in time. They put the Temple of Dendur in there. It's been there for 50 years now. It's in the Sackler wing. I love the Temple of Dendur because they even have a little water feature that goes around it. And water to the Egyptians was like the fountain of youth and rebirth. So that you see a lot of that in their temples. There's even some graffiti etched into the stone walls of the Temple of Dendur, so you can see its long and chronicled history. They do have a marvelous collection of Egyptian artwork, but there's none better than the Brooklyn Museum of Art. So if you really want to get a taste of Egyptian artwork, head on out to the Brooklyn Museum of Art as well. But here you can see some sarcophagi and a little sphinx. Sphinx means stranger in Greek. In fact, every Egyptian word that we talk about today, sarcophagus and pharaoh and pyramids and everything, are actually Greek words because they chronicled their cousins, the Egyptians. Anyway, they have a marvelous collection. They have these little pieces. It's just endless. Everybody in New York was an Egyptophile, so everyone started collecting Egyptian artifacts. They even have some, megalithic society objects from Assyria. So they have these winged gods, huge megalithic things. They have a lot of Greek work as well. Of course, we owe everything to the Greeks, from our philosophy to our politics to our architecture, medicine. It's wonderful. They have a wonderful Greek collection. Greeks are interesting because they do a lot of naked sculptures, and that's because the Greeks thought ideal body, ideal mind. You couldn't have one without the other. If you look a little further in the back, you see some Roman sculptures because they always clothed their sculptures because the clothes made the man. Another interesting thing about Roman art is that their people started to have character. Like you could tell which Roman person they were showing, where the Greeks were all kind of look perfect, like Hollywood movie stars. Go, oh, here's some Roman busts. Okay, we had India pose along with those Roman busts because they were so important. Lineage is so important to the Romans. They carried their ancestors' heads everywhere with them. So that was cute. So they go all through the period of time. Like I said, 5,000 years of art. So here's some armor that a couple collected and then donated to the Metropolitan. They also have an incredible collection of European art all through the ages. So here's something from Peter Bruegel the Elder, kind of like the first pop artist that you could see because he depicted everyday life, called The Harvesters. And then of course we have Titian, examples of Titian, Venus and Adonis, a little nudity there. But then let's go to the American wing, because after all, this is an American museum. And this is, of course, the monumental piece done by Eric Lutz, a German-American, Washington Crossing the Delaware. Any American growing up, you saw in your junior high school history book, a picture of Washington crossing the Delaware. It epitomizes the strength and diversity of a young nation about to be born. And it's monumental, as you can see. It's been refurbished, the frame has been redone. They had to recapture that frame that had been dismantled before by pictures. So they saw pictures of the original and they redid the frame. So in the new, relatively new American wing, you're gonna see lots of interesting our American art. So here we have a little closer up of Washington crossing the Delaware. Now, Lutz, as I said, was a German-American, and he wanted to make sure that all immigrants were represented in Washington crossing the Delaware, seeing how all these people came together to make this great nation. You can see a tam o' shanter from a Scotsman, you can see a black man rowing, you can see French fur traders. But what always interested me, and maybe it was because it was just at my eye level, was this chunk of ice in the Delaware River. And if you look closely, kind of at the left-hand side and this chunk of ice at a diagonal, it looks to me like skyscrapers. And you also have this man in red kind of looking down. It's like he's looking down into the river and he's seeing our future. of these huge buildings that will become America. So another great American artist, actually another immigrant, was Thomas Cole. He came to the United States when he was 17 years old, and he was just in love with the American landscape. He wanted to preserve the American landscape because in native Britain, where he came from, everything was dirty from their Industrial Revolution. Well, he didn't want that to happen. So he did this monumental painting called the Oxbow. And if you look very closely, in the lower, a little bit to the center right, is Thomas Cole himself painting in this forest. But what's more important is you see on the left-hand side a storm, an impending storm, and these broken trees. But on the right-hand side, you see this glorious golden landscape. But what he's telling you is, don't do too much to nature, because that storm is going to come over and it's going to punish you for denuding the landscape. So if you ever get close to it in the Met, look at that golden part. There's sheep and there's farms and everybody, man cultivating nature. But on the left-hand side, nature is really in control. So it's kind of a subtle warning to everyone, the Oxbow. And here's a close-up of Thomas Cole as he's painting his moral lesson here on site. It's so cute. All right, even modern contemporary artists want to replicate the Oxbow. And here's Stephen Hawkins, who did his version of the Oxbow, which is more modern, as you can see. And in those fields, toward the front of the painting, he has written kind of a diary of his life and his reflection about art. So it's interesting to see how contemporary artists reflect back to art history. You see that a lot. So other things, of course, monumental portraits of our heroes through the ages. But what's even more fun is this John Singer Sargent painting of the Wyndham sisters. Now the Wyndham sisters, this crazy American artist who was in Great Britain because he'd been kind of, run out of France for doing this salacious portrait. We'll talk about that one in just a second. But anyway, the British and the Americans couldn't wait for John Singer Sargent to do their portraits after he'd done this kind of X-rated one in France. But anyway, so the Wyndham sisters' father asked John Singer Sargent to come and paint his beautiful daughters, his 3 daughters. Now there's mom in the background. So they're clustered around their mother's portrait that was done by an earlier artist, of course. John Singer Sargent had them pose individually and together. If you want to read more about the whole process, you can read this book, The Wild Wyndhams. And I've started, it's kind of interesting to see how the very rich lived and their lives and what transformed them. The oldest one is at the top, as you can see on the right, and then the baby's below her, and then the middle sister is toward the left. And you can see the middle sister has kind of a whimsical look. Well, she's just lost a baby son, and so she's really not in the mood to be sitting for that portrait. So it's interesting to see what's happening in these people's lives as they were being painted. Now, the salacious painting that he did, Madame X. There's also been a book written about this one. Well, what John Singer Sargent did is the first time he painted it, here on the right, you can see that one of her gown straps is missing. And her ear is bright red, like she's just gotten up from a pillow where her head's been on, laying on one side. So she's got this red ear and she's got this bare shoulder and she's very pale. And people just went crazy about this. Kind of ran him out of France because of the scandal. So before he left, though, he put that second strap on her shoulder as if that was going to fix anything. But anyway, here's John in his studio after he's done that second strap, before he leaves for Great Britain. All right, so another thing they have, which is wonderful, is a lot of period rooms where they've bought entire rooms from different estates abroad and some other Beaux-Arts mansions in the United States and recreated them right inside. So you can go and see how other people lived in all this glorious interior fashion. But then fast forward, let's look at this Thomas Hart Benton mural. So they do have some American art as well. And they took this out of a building and they put it here for all to see. Now a close-up shows Americana. You've got women and men dancing to jazz. You've got people in movie theaters, everything that people were doing in the 30s. There's the stock market up there. There's women flying around in Hollywood. It's just amazing how he captured it. He was like an early Norman Rockwell capturing American society. Also, someone who always captures our attention is Frank Lloyd Wright. So they dismantled one of his interiors and put it in the American wing as well. So you can see this complete interior of, here's another shot of it. Remember, Frank Lloyd Wright designed everything, the furniture, the windows, the lamps, the skylights, the rugs, everything. He invented what? The carport and precast concrete and all manner of inventions with his architecture. And this came out of this home. You can probably see which room it came out of. And that was dismantled and brought to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. All right, another thing the Met is famous for is its gala. Now, ever since 1948, they've had this splendid gala, and all the proceeds go to the Fashion Institute. It's a fabulous institute, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Unfortunately, it wasn't held this year because, as you might imagine, because the illness was going around, but I thought you might like to see some of the fashions from last year. So on the right, I don't know who that celebrity, or, you know, on the right is Lady Gaga. I don't know who the fashion designer is. On the left, I know the fashion designer is Versace, but I don't know the starlet or whoever she is, but just outrageous things. And here we have Diane Van Vostenberg, she's on the left. And then we have the Kardashian sisters, or whatever family they're from, I don't know, on the right. I like their secondary colors and their texture. I don't know what that guy is doing leaning over. Maybe he's making a comment about their outfits. No, anyway, and here's Katy Perry in her chandelier outfit. These are all from last year. And I'm thinking, how do these ladies sit down in the gala seats? Well, maybe they don't. But all proceeds go to the Fashion Institute, which put on fabulous fashion shows. Here's Chanel going around the Temple of Dendur. So they give these exhibitions. I went to two of these. I went to one in New York and one when they had the Fashion of Impressionism in Chicago as well. And it's always interesting to see how different museums curate the same show. And I tell you, Chicago was much better than the Met. Please forgive me, but it was the way they curated it. But here's some fashions of Impressionism. Remember, the Impressionists were trying to capture the fashion of the day and the culture of the day, the leisure time of the day. And so the fashions were quite incredible as well. Reflected in the paintings, the one in Monet did in the back, you can see that that white dress is also the dress here on display. And here's some more pieces. Their paintings and the outfit, the very same outfits. Fashions. They also held an incredible Alexander McQueen exhibition at the Met. Here's some more McQueens after his death. But let's go back to their collection. Here's some European paintings. I'm going to try to do this kind of chronologically. So at the top, you can see there's some Goyas. I guess most of them are Goyas. And then below, we can see lots of Italian paintings, huge collections. Here's a Caravaggio. Very few Caravaggios exist, so it's really a coup to have one. It's the Nile of St. Peter. Remember, Caravaggio was an Italian Baroque painter, along with, he came after Rembrandt and Vermeer. We have the neoclassical artist David. He's doing the death of Socrates. These are incredible historical paintings. El Greco with Toledo. Spanish Baroque painter. We have back to Dutch Baroque with Vermeer. Young woman with a water pitcher. The light, the shade, the variety that he used of textures. He only did 35 paintings in his lifetime. Oh, here's a Mary Cassatt. You know, at first, the Met only collected European paintings, and they begrudgingly started to take some Americans as well, which we're really happy to see. Rosa Bonheur, the Horse Fair, this huge, huge painting, what, 20 feet long, 12 feet wide. And there's Rosa right in the middle on a horse in a blue jacket with a little black cap. She has a fascinating history in life. Now, a lot of rich people donated a lot of beautiful things to the Met, and one of them was Walter Annenberg. Now, Annenberg, as you might remember, is a publisher, and he was also appointed to Nixon's ambassador to England. So while he was in Europe, he collected a lot of French Impressionist work. Now, he only collected Impressionist artwork that showed people at leisure and at play. The last thing he wanted to show anybody or to be surrounded with were people doing work, because he was very industrious and he made lots and lots of money. And he collected lots and lots of beautiful Impressionists. You can see there's Van Goghs, lots of Van Goghs there at the top, Renoirs, Monets. He just has a fabulous collection. And it used to be in his home in Palm Springs. And it used to be, you know, you walked into the Annenberg, which was really kind of a low-key, mid-50s looking ranch house in the desert. And you walk in and you see all these fabulous paintings. They even had a Van Gogh perched over the fireplace. Guess what? They never put a fire in that fireplace. So of course they've all been moved and replaced by replicas, but I highly recommend booking a tour of the Annenberg estate next time you're in Palm area. Just incredible. Now, he was originally from Philadelphia, so Philadelphia Museum of Art was hoping to get some of his work, but he only wanted to put his artwork in the best of the best museums. So Philly got a few Impressionist work as a consolation prize, but most of it went to the Met. Here's a Monet, and Monet was, of course, inspired by Japanese prints. They have a Gustav Klimt. They have, of course, more Degas. Then they jump to more American pieces. This is Georgia O'Keeffe. You have to remember at a very early age, like in the 20s, the 1920s, Georgia O'Keeffe was still a very young woman, became the highest priced female American artist in the world. And so they picked up one of hers. Cow skull in red, white, and blue. That's from O'Keeffe. And here it is in the piece, or in the museum, with the two other O'Keeffes. Now they also have a roof deck, which I particularly enjoy, especially on a beautiful New York summer day. You go up to the roof deck and you see this, well, this was a show. Cao Xin is a Chinese artist, contemporary artist, and what he was doing for quite a while, especially after 9/11, was he was showing many taxidermied animals. Actually, they're not real, but they are made to look real. So they're not taxidermy, but they're sculptures. And he stuck them with all these objects to show you about pain after 9/11, like I said. And also he riddles them with objects that are confiscated at airports. So any knife, fork, screwdriver, little pen knife you might have in your carry-on, they were confiscated, as we still do today. And he put them in these objects, just to show you the scale, and that it's a rooftop. That's me. Notice I don't have any objects poking out of me, hopefully. Another exhibition on the roof deck, of course, is Jeff Koons, and a retrospective of his. This was done quite a while ago, maybe 10 years ago. That balloon dog, you can pick that balloon dog up for $58 million. If you want to see one in real life, you can go to the Broad in LA, the Broad Museum. They have one. Now, interest in contemporary art came along a little late for the Met, but the Met did start collecting things. And in one of their new wings, they have this fabulous collection of Warhols and Chuck Close. And let's see, who else do I see there? Oh, I see David Hockney. They have, let's see, Ansel Kiefer. Just fabulous stuff. My husband's favorite, of course, is Autumn Rhythm by Jackson Pollock. You probably couldn't touch this thing for under $500 million. It's very large. It's beautiful. That's a perfect example of abstract expressionism, mid-20th century. They have more color field painters like Alpha Pi by Morris Lewis. Winterpool by Rauschenberg, who's a pop artist. Now, because of their expanding contemporary collection, they bought the Met Brewer, or the Brewer building used to be the first modern building for the Whitney. And so when the Whitney has their new location now, that building became empty and the Met bought it so they could put more contemporary art in it. Now, what's interesting is the Frick collection, which we're about to see, has rented part of it to house their collection while they're being renovated. So I'm really happy to see that these art museums in New York City are collaborating and letting each other use space, because the Frick collection is literally steps away from the Met Brewer. This is a building that, like the Garnier Opera House in Paris is known for the architect, Garnier. The Brewer is known for the architect who was the Brewer architect built this building, designed this building. So here's the interior of the Brewer. Very contemporary, always showing contemporary artists. Also, what's affiliated with the Met, if you buy a ticket to the Met, you can also go to the cloisters. Now, what's a cloister? Well, John D. Rockefeller Jr., I'm going to call him Jr. from now on, decided that he really liked medieval art. He liked art that was at least 1,000 years old. And so what he wanted to do is recreate this Gothic and Romanesque art and architecture museum. So he dismantled part of an abbey in France and had it shipped over here, had it rebuilt. In fact, he bought hundreds of acres in New Jersey across the Hudson River from this, so that nothing could be built to obscure the people of New Jersey looking over at the cloisters. Now, I'm not making this stuff up. What was interesting about Junior was that his father, they made a lot of money in oil, Standard Oil, was considered the richest American of all times. I think he still might be in that category, but he chose to spend a lot of his money on this ancient art, unlike his wife, Abby Rockefeller, who went to the modern masters. So we're going to see a lot of her art collection at the MoMA in just a minute. So we had a little discourse in that family for quite a few years. So here's the interior of the cloisters. You can see the vaulted ceilings, the stained glass windows, the sarcophagi. This is what Junior really liked. But Junior did a lot of other things too. He redid Fontainebleau after World War I in France. He also did Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg here in the United States. He really was a history buff. Okay, but we're going to head down. We're going to leave the Met, unfortunately. There's so much more to see, but let's head down Central Park East, and we're going to go to the Frick collection. Now, Henry Clay Frick was another multimillionaire, but he made his money in coal and steel in the very early 20th century. And he loved European art. In fact, he and his wife and his young daughter, Helen, made at least 9 trips to Europe on buying sprees before his daughter, Helen, was 17 years old. So at a very young age, Helen was kind of his, partner in crime as far as collecting artwork. So as you can see, we're walking down from the Met, past Central Park, down to the Frick collection. It's a very easy walk on a beautiful summer day, not a problem, it's all shaded. And you walk into another Beaux-Arts architecture building. What Henry did was he bought this lot. It used to be the Lenox Library. Well, the Lenox Library was going to move to a larger location. So he paid for the lot across from Central Park, $2.7 million in 1906, which is $60 million in today's dollars. Well, he had his 3-story Beaux-Arts home built, and that was done in 1912, and he lived there until he died in 1919. And then he bequeathed it to the city of New York with all of its art collection. But it didn't really open until 1935 because his wife and daughter lived there until 1931. So here it is from Central Park. There's a huge addition being done, a 7-story addition behind this building that's going to house more of his art collection and his library, his extensive library. So here's the legacy. I just talked to you a little bit about that. Here's the entrance. This is the old entrance. This used to be the entrance where cars could pull into the Frick mansion and let the people out, because Henry Clay Frick was really known for throwing dinner parties at least 2 a week. Why not? If you've got a mansion full of great art, you'd want to share it with people. But this used to be kind of the drop-off point for his guests. But here we have the Fragonard room. So he, like many other wealthy Americans, would go to Europe and they would buy entire rooms full of artwork and bring it back to their homes so that they could have the same majestic history and good taste of all those Europeans. So here we have the Fragonard room. Fragonard, of course, was a French Rococo artist, so everybody's pretty and fluffy and pink and romantic in there. He would buy the furniture, the draperies, the flooring, and bring it right back to his mansion. Here is a black and white photograph of how it looked originally. Here's some more Fragonards. As you can see, these are close-ups of the pretty pink, sexually charged French Rococo paintings. Here's the Boucher room. Okay, Boucher was an instructor of Fragonard, so you can see a lot of similarities there. A lot of light and mirrors, just like Versailles. And here's the dining room with these massive, those are British Romantic paintings. He's got Gainsboroughs and Reynolds. And anyway, here's some more Rococo paintings. And these just line the hallways and the rooms. And here is a 100-foot-long room, a gallery that houses everything from Rembrandts, Constables, Turners. It's quite amazing as you walk through this gallery space. He collected furniture, coins, hundreds, millions of books. And here's a photograph of how it once looked. I think one of the highlights, and Henry Frick loved this piece too. This is St. Francis by Bellini. This is one of the very first, I would say, oil paintings, because at the date, 1480, oil painting was just coming into vogue. Religious painters loved it because it had a luminosity and light reflects the quality of Christ. And so here's St. Francis, and he's barefoot, so he's very pious. And you can see a little skull on the table on the right. So that's talking about mortality, and people gather around this piece. It's quite large, actually. And I guess the story is that Frick would come out at night when everyone else was asleep, because they had like 27 servants in the house. He would come out and just stare at this painting of his. I love this tiny little vignette part of the painting where the rabbit is peeking out of the hole. St. Francis is the saint of animals. And he looks like he's very knowledgeable, like what the heck is going on here? But it's just, I wanted to show you some close-ups because it's so much fun to get as close as you can to these paintings. And here's some people gathered around it so I could show you the scale, just how large this painting is. It's gorgeous. And you can see the carved wood architecture throughout his mansion. He left no detail unattended to. So here's one of his other sitting rooms. Here's a sitting room. So you've got El Greco's, you've got Hans Holbein. There's this very famous figures in history, St. Thomas More, and you've got St. Jerome by El Greco. It's just jaw-dropping. Every turn you make, you see some incredible, historically relevant artworks. Of course, we always have to have a couple of Rembrandts in our collection, so we have a self-portrait. I think you particularly enjoyed this one too, because maybe he saw himself as this regal elder man, just like Rembrandt, Dutch Baroque. Rembrandt's Polish writer, very famous paintings. He has 3 Vermeers. That's 10% of all Vermeers ever painted. Dutch Baroque, as you can tell, the Dutch were very good cartographers, so Vermeer liked to point out the latest inventions of the day. They're always serene little paintings, and you can always tell a Vermeer because the light comes from the left, diagonally through the composition. And that darkened light gives you that feeling of depth that he's known for. Here, this is, he's always got a little innuendo going on. This is called Music Lesson Interrupted. So I love the titles because it kind of gives you a clue to the story behind the painting. Okay. So here we are, the British Romantics. This is called The White Horse by Constable. The British Romantics, Constable and Turner, were highly influential to the French Impressionists. So as you look at these pieces, I want you to realize that the white light in the exterior landscape is what really influenced the Impressionists to do what they did. And these are huge paintings, monumental. And here's another Salisbury Cathedral that Constable did. What I particularly enjoy about this piece is the water dripping from the cow's mouth. So there's Constable painting this incredibly detailed cathedral, and then you come close to it, and you can see these tiny little brush strokes of droplets of water. So his use of white, as you can see, with the dark in the front, gives it that high contrast that you will see in Impressionist paintings as well. So anyway, 3 Turners in a rotunda. And here's a close-up of a Turner. Again, that bright light and being outside in the landscape. Now, of course, Constable and Turner painted in their studios, where the Impressionists painted en plein air. But Turner was known for doing a lot of little watercolor sketches outside and then bringing those back to his studio. Ang. Ang is a French neoclassic painter. So you can always tell them because they're very kind of stiff and static, not in the bad sense, but more in the Greek and Roman type portraiture. And here's the portrait of Comtesse Hausenville. She has an attitude, which I really like. Was known as a silk painter, but I think I'm showing you it in context in a hallway because that table, at the time that Frick bought that table was more expensive than any painting or any piece of furniture. So that piece is the most expensive piece in the collection. Probably not so much now, but it was when he bought it. Here's some Gainsborough, another British Romantic painter. Women cascading through the park, and you can almost see their dresses swishing through there. Here we are, a little close-up of the ladies. Incredible painter. And here's one of his portraits that he did of Lady Innes. And the funny thing about Gainsborough, the man at the helm of the London Academy of Arts at the time was, of course, Sir Joshua Reynolds. And Sir Joshua Reynolds made all these rules. He said, you know, you should never put blue in a painting. So what does Gainsborough do? Kind of his rival. He puts blue in every painting. So think of Blue Boy. That is a Gainsborough as well. Another incredible piece that he has, of course, as an American artist, is Gilbert Stuart. And Gilbert Stuart made his livelihood on portraits of George Washington. So here we have George Washington, 1795. He was about 60, early 60s at this particular point. Stuart's considered an American neoclassical painter. Neoclassical, you always see a column in the background, or you see a drape in the background, drape studies. But it's a beautiful crystal clear painting that he has in his library, actually. Now, like I mentioned before, they're doing an expansion of the Frick, and they're going to open up the second floor room. So this is the stairway as it looks now. And you can see that little Renoir there in the alcove. Well, originally, the promenade by Renoir was in the upstairs hallway. And the upstairs hallway is now going to be open with more collection, more furniture, more of their personal items. But they did collect some Impressionist artwork. That's about as modern as they get in the Frick. And here's some John Singer Sargent. So they did collect more American artists, some of his portraiture. These are very large scale. These are human size portraits. They're just gorgeous. You can see every little detail. And he was also known for his collection of porcelains. Seems like every rich guy in New York wanted a lot of porcelain, a lot of dishes, a lot of Chinese painted blue and white vases. That was a big thing for them. So this is one of the exterior hallways, looking over his garden. There's Henry Clay Frick and his daughter Helen. He lost two children, and two children lived to adulthood. Helen went on to live to be 96 years old. She died in 1984, and she carried on her father's legacy for all those years from 1919 till 1984, trying to sharpen or shine up his reputation and to continue his collection. She also has a collection in their native Pittsburgh. Very interesting family history. And here's their expansion plans. You can see the 7-story library that they want to put on. They also want to do a new entrance to the Frick. So that'll be fun to see. I'll have to go back. Now, you know, we've got museum back. It's time that we move on, but we got to get a little bite to eat here. So we're going to go back to the plaza and have a quick bite in their fantastic, very diverse food court. Give us strength, because we're going to walk a few blocks now to Midtown to the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, which has the most extensive collection of modern art in the world. Just remember that. Everyone looks up to the MoMA. So here we are at the plaza. We go down around the corner and there's the Museum of Modern Art. This Museum of Modern Art would not exist without 3 very forward-thinking ladies. Abby Rockefeller, who was married to Junior, Lily Bliss, and Mary Sullivan. And they have, at this time, they have over 150,000 modern works of art. Like I said, they were very forward-thinking, and they started collecting things that no one else was interested in at the time. They felt, like art historians feel now, that Cézanne, Van Gogh, and Gauguin were the most influential artists to 20th century artists, and they started collecting that. Now, when Abby married, she came from a very rich political family as well, but Abby Ulrich married Junior, and Junior decided he was going to put her on a budget. So because she had a budget, she couldn't buy all the work she wanted to, so she influenced other very wealthy New Yorkers to buy certain works of art. And we're going to see some of those incredible pieces now. So here are the 3 ladies, the daring ladies. But I want you to know that when Junior married Abby, he gave her a gift of cash. She immediately turned around and donated that entire lump of money to the YWCA of New York. So these 3 ladies did more than sit around and collect artwork. They did a lot of good for schools and institutions for women. I just can't tell you how philanthropic they were. And they passed that on to their children as a legacy. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, she did kind of have a hard time with Junior because he thought that modern art was useless. It was irresponsible to buy it. He thought it was some Bolshevik plot. And so he didn't even want to see what art she collected. And so what they did when they built their 9-story home, that was built right on the plot of where the MoMA is now, they had an elevator that went up to the 7th floor so that Junior didn't have to see the art collection that was housed on the 7th floor. And anybody who wanted to see the collection could go up the elevator and not go into any other family area, but they just go see the art because Junior didn't want to see it. It's really kind of funny how that all happened. Didn't dissuade her at all. So she herself amassed 181 paintings and gave them all to the MoMA when it opened in 1929. Abby's always been quoted, "You must always show the best." And she did. She bought the best of the best. She had quite an eye for those marvelous works of art. So here's the new MoMA. And you can see it's wide open spaces, a lot of light comes in. Here's the sculpture garden. And David Rockefeller, her youngest son, always said that's where he was born. He was born in the sculpture garden. Well, not actually. That's where their mansion used to be before they moved to their 40-room triplex down the block a little way. But this is where the 9-story mansion used to be. And that's where he was born. He had 5 siblings, so there were 6 Rockefellers. And it's a sculpture garden now, which is quite incredible, open space. So a lot of the galleries look out onto the contemporary art that's out there. So in the sculpture garden, you have everything from bronzes going on to videos, you have permanent collections, you have traveling exhibitions. It's quite an exciting place to be. But inside it, to me, is even more exciting. They collected Monet, Cézanne's, Van Gogh's, like I said, Gauguin's. And so here's a very large Monet, water lilies. You have to remember that in the 20s, just after Monet died, he wasn't that popular. You know, like people tried to give Monets away. His son tried to give them away. Nobody really wanted it. He did a lot of them, you know? But in the 50s, he became popular again. But they collected Monets even when he wasn't very popular. So here's one of his fabulous water lily paintings. The Bather by Cézanne. Even though he wasn't a modern artist, you know, the museum opened, 25 years after his death, they really thought he was a pivotal figure. And so they have a lot of his sketchbooks, they have a lot of his drawings, and they have the Bather, and they have, of course, Mont Saint-Victoire. And of course, their crowning glory, you know, everybody loves this Starry Night. I read one art historian said that it's the most recognizable artwork in the Western world. Some people might differ. They might say, oh no, the Mona Lisa is the most recognized. But I think everyone loves Starry Night. And the interesting thing I found out about the research here is that Van Gogh was influenced by the astronomer that 44 years before he painted this painting, he discovered a whirlpool galaxy. So a galaxy that spun around, and they recorded it. And so Van Gogh had seen that, and he put that in Starry Night. So he didn't make it all up out of his mind, although most of it he probably did. So here you can see people gathered around it. It's like you got to elbow your way through sometimes to get close to Starry Night. And here's a close-up of it. You can see each individual brushstroke. So they have hypothesized this painting to death about the cypress tree in the front and how he did it from his hospital window when he was trying to recover from a psychotic episode, and the tiny little village underneath, and then the swirling sky, so ominous. But he had some post-impressionist work, this other work by Signat, who was a contemporary of Seurat, of course. They have the first Art Nouveau painting in America that was bought, and it's by Augusto Klimt. And you can see this pregnant woman, the naked breasts, and then these incredible decorations, designs, organic designs. You can see people below her, mysterious, Augusto Klimt. Of course, they have the Demoiselles d'Aveyron by Picasso, which some people say this is the first real modern painting. You know, all these, details that show you, you know, this Greek stiff static Egyptian form, and you have African masks, and you have these women staring out at you from the middle like, here I am, what am you going to do with me? His good friend, let's see, George Braque said, oh, looking at that painting is like drinking kerosene. You know, it's just so ugly in his eyes. But Picasso did it, and it's famous. And those ladies are about life size. It was inspired by a brothel in Barcelona, to tell you the truth. They have Henry Rousseau, a self-taught artist, the Sleeping Gypsy, very large paintings. Henry Rousseau never left France, so everybody wondered how he was doing these intense jungle scenes. This is called The Dream. They're so much fun to get close to. Matisse, they bought the first Matisse brought to America, and they started a whole chain reaction, because then everybody started buying Matisse. Of course, The Persistence of Memory has got a great story. A dealer in Europe, I think it was in Paris, couldn't get rid of it. So he finally bought it for like $250. And he decided, well, maybe I'll take it to New York. And so they bargained off and on. Alfred Barr, who was the first director of the MoMA, said, well, you know, I'll give you $350 for it, which is worth about, you know, in today's dollars, it's about $3,000. And so, you know, they were kind of skeptical about what, you know, if it would ever be worth anything. Now you couldn't touch it for $1 billion. everybody knows about the persistence of memory. And they think that Dali did it after a hangover, after a party. And he went down and he saw this melting cheese and it looked kind of like a face. And so he put it in his painting. I mean, just wonderful stories behind these paintings. Okay, so Marc Chagall, My Village, done around 1930. So very hip for them to buy something like that. Of course, they have to have an O'Keeffe. And here we have Frida Kahlo, one of her self-portraits. I love it that they bought so many women. And here's, talking about women, here's a woman won by de Kooning, who had a hard time selling his work at first, but they bought it up. Lichtenstein, pop artist. Golden Maryland. They bought a Rothko, I don't think I have it in this presentation, in 1960 for $10,000. And then it was sold again in 2007, I think, for almost 73 million. So it's not a bad, investment. Mondrian loved New York City so much, he created this piece called Broadway Boogie Woogie, and that sits at the MoMA as well. They have Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth, which everyone knows. Fabulous. Get close to it. Every blade of grass or wheat, feel like you could pluck it right off the canvas. Helen Frankenthaler's Jacob's Ladder. Pivotal artist, color field artist, American painter. Faith Ringgold, her American People series. She did several of these, quite incredible series. They have Basquiat, a good friend of Andy Warhol. He did Glenn. This is a massive painting, it's wall size. Glenn was a friend of his. I wonder what he really thought about Glenn. I don't know, it's kind of fun to see. Rosenquist's mural, another pop artist. And then they do these blockbuster shows. Cindy Sherman had one we went to. And here you can see, this is right before you go into Cindy Sherman. That's Cindy Sherman in the red dress. Cindy Sherman is like a chameleon. She does only self-portraits. She photographs herself in all different kinds of attire and costumes and sexes and everything else. And they said, Cindy, why did you just do such really large portraits at the opening of your show at the MoMA? She goes, oh, because I thought it was something a guy would do. It's just like, a man would do that, so I'm going to do that too. And here's Cindy getting ready to photograph herself. She does all this herself. So she's got a green screen and she dresses up in all kinds of regalia, or not, and takes pictures of herself. She's quite accomplished. She's a few years younger than I am, so she'll be around for a while. And these are some of the pieces that were in her blockbuster. As you can see, she represents a lot of different history as well. There's a French Rococo princess on the left, and some Renaissance recreations. Every one of those is Cindy dressed up. And they also do smaller, unique exhibitions, like we saw this Picasso sculpture exhibition. Picasso did everything, as you know, but it was kind of fun to see his Cubist-like sculptures. Okay, so MoMA's doing this expansion. David Griffin donated a lot of money toward that. Her children also, Abby Rockefeller's children donated a lot. David, her youngest, who just died a couple years ago, sat through a lot of art meetings and started collecting artwork himself as well. And he ended up, during his lifetime, gave over $1.3 billion to charities. And when he and his wife passed away, they left all their estate to be auctioned off to fund a lot of their favorite charities. Over $1 billion worth of art went to charities. So her spirit lives on through her children. And here's the new MoMA expansion. We were going to go there in April, but that got delayed. So I'm anxious to see it. Really great stuff. Now to go to the next museum, we could walk, but it might take a while. So we're going to take a cab and we're going to go down to the Whitney. So we're heading downtown, down Manhattan, the Chelsea area, where the High Line ends. Here's the new Whitney. Been in several locations. This, if you can't tell, is a Renzo piano building, and it was completed in 2015. While they were renovating and creating this edifice to art on the Hudson River, a lot of their collection went to the Brooklyn Museum. And that's what got me to the Brooklyn Museum in the first place. Has their own their own subway stop, so it's easy to get to. But that's where I saw the Egyptian collection, which was quite incredible. But the Whitney owes everything it is today to Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who was an artist, philanthropist, and a businesswoman. She's very shrewd art collector as well. She was brilliant because she decided she had so much faith in American artists, both men and women, that she was only going to collect American artwork. Like I said, she was an artist in her own right. She got several commissions. Here's one of the outlooks to the Hudson River at the Whitney. Beautiful. Here's some of the modern interior spaces. So again, it's just a wide open white space. The original is here on the upper left. And then it went to the Brewer Building, as I mentioned. So the original Whitney was built in 36, and then the Brewer was 66. It just kept expanding and getting bigger and bigger. Her daughter and her granddaughter have kept her legacy alive by collecting more and more artwork. This is the original studio space. You can see how crammed in and salon style all the artwork was done. And here's a portrait of Gertrude, a great artist in her own right. In fact, she had several commissions. She did a lot of, again, devoted a lot of advancement of women through the arts. She and Abby did a lot for women. This is the sculpture that she was commissioned for the Daughters Columbus, it was called. She received the commission. It was $50,000 at the beginning of the 20th century. I don't even know how much that's worth in today's dollars, but she didn't get it because she was a Vanderbilt Whitney. In fact, the Whitneys did not support her as an artist or her art collection, but she did it anyway. She was very rich before she married into them anyway. So anyway, she had a mansion and studio in New York City, and she had one in Paris. And she's done many sculptures, a couple in DC, the Columbus one in DC, and this one on lower is in Washington, DC. And the upper one is obviously Buffalo Bill. So those were her sculptures. But everyone was so in love with her and what she was trying to do. Edward Hopper left 3,000 of his artworks to the Whitney. So they have the largest holdings of Edward Hopper in the world. And here's one of them, Sunday morning. Soir blue. Just his watercolors, his oil paintings, his sketchbooks, lighted to lights. Incredible artist. We could talk a lot about him. Of course, they collected O'Keeffe's. They're very famous for this one. And these. I'm giving a Zoom lecture for Osher, May 22nd from 1 to 3, all about Georgia O'Keeffe and her many lives. It's really a very complex life and livelihood. So I hope you'll join me for that one as well. These are just some examples. Here's another Thomas Hart Benton. He'd ever everything from religious paintings to poker nights. And this poker night was actually a reflection of Streetcar Named Desire movie that was showing at the time. So reflecting pop culture. John Kerr's Baptism in Kansas, which is a large piece. Brooklyn Bridge by Joseph Stella. The collection is just, make sure hearts sing to go through there. Jackson Pollock's, of course, who lived and worked in New York. Number 27. You have to remember these Pollocks go for anywhere between, what, 200 million, 300 million dollars. Well, they're big, so they're worth it. Here's de Kooning, another abstract expressionist. This is Girl with a Bicycle. And we can see his later work where he totally dissolved into abstraction. So you can't even tell what that is. Where in Pollock, as his work progressed, he started going back to the figure. So he just flip-flopped from de Kooning, what de Kooning did. And they always do these fabulous retrospects, especially on the 4th floor. Here's a Lichtenstein retrospect There's young Liechtenstein. Everybody needs their 1961 bathroom documented. And Jesper John's Three Flags, a pivotal piece. Helen Frankenthaler, Joan Mitchell, Diebenkorn. Diebenkorn was smart. He immigrated out to California at a very young age, and he did a lot of California landscapes. But this one was a lot of fun. We caught this one in New York at the Whitney on the 4th floor. Laura Owens, a very young contemporary artist, just filled the entire 4th floor of the Whitney. It was so much fun to see the diverse work of hers. She never apologizes for doing pretty paintings. And she's inspired by young children. She's got a very whimsical, fun feeling about her work. Just makes you feel good to look at Laura Owens' work. And this is many tall canvases. They must be at least 12 feet tall and 8 feet wide. And as you can see, they're configured so that you can read the entire little story there, inspired by her young son. So lots of different little twists to make you interested. Her work is a combination of text and image and abstract marks and really thick paint. So they're very tactile and it makes you want to look at them. They also have Andy Warhol's and Basquiat's. This is called Hollywood Africans by Basquiat. And they always do a biennial. So every 2 years, they do this wonderful art collection of very contemporary artists, young artists that maybe don't have such a huge reputation yet. So in 1964, they included Marisol Escobar in their biennial, which I really appreciate because she was a young emerging artist. She was a good friend of Andy Warhol's. But what's interesting about this particular piece from Marisol is all 4 of those figures are self-portraits of Marisol. As a young child, the multi-faces actually are plaster casts of her face. And the one little one in the pink blouse there, that's a photograph of Marisol. And then she said what inspired her to do this piece was this taxidermied head of a dog. You see there on the lower left, that's a real dog head. But then she carves out each of these blocks and puts them together in an assemblage. So they included her in the 64 biennial. But they always have emerging artists. So these are the most recent biennials that they've had of very contemporary artists. Really groundbreaking stuff. You never know what's going to happen in art next. Puppies, puppies. Puppies, puppies, yes. And I thought this historically was kind of fun. One of their more recent acquisitions, as you can see in 2017, was Faith Ringgold's piece, Hate is a Sin. Well, it all reflects back to her experience in 1971. You see Faith, you see the red circle, that's Faith Ringgold. Her teenage daughter's right behind her, and they're protesting at the Whitney. You can see the Brewer building, the kind of inverted stair steps behind her. Anyway, they were protesting because the Whitney had just shown an exhibition of white men's art. They hadn't included women, they hadn't included anyone of color, so they decided to go out and protest. And as they protested, someone came up to her and said a very hateful thing. And so she went directly home and she did this piece called Hate is a Sin. And she kind of documented the happenings over here on the right. And then the Whitney turned around and bought it, which I think is really good. It's art history, society, culture. But the last big blockbuster that we saw there was Andy Warhol. We saw it in New York and we saw it in San Francisco. Again, to see how they curated it differently. And they were very different, but they're both spectacular. So they dug up about, 300 rarely seen works of art by Andy Warhol. Of course, he did so many Maos, so we've all seen Mao before. But it was kind of fun to see. They had drawings, sketches, they had lithographs, paintings, of course, installations, this beautiful little pink horned cow and his little poppy flowers. They had video installations. So a whole retrospective of work. You just felt engulfed in Andyism. It was so much fun. And that's me taking pictures of what else? Shoes. And this is Andy Warhol's shoe, because he worked as a shoe store, window dresser for a long time. So then he started doing shoes. Beautiful gold and silver. And then we're going to leave the Whitney, sadly, but I guess we're right on time. So I'm ready to take any comments or questions you have. But so we're leaving the Andy Warhol exhibition, we're leaving the Whitney, and we're going to head to Monetta's for dinner, one of my very favorite places in New York